One of the reasons I like to go back in time and take a look at ancient history is because some of that history has remained alive and active to this very day. Now, what parts of that history remain? Well, several. But today, we're going to be focusing on the mythos of ancient Greece, particularly those having to do with the deity commonly known as Apollo. I want everyone to take a moment and think about something. How many times has something been presented to you as one thing, only to later find out that it was always something else entirely? I think we have all experienced that con to some degree. But doesn't it bother you when it is done on a mass scale? I used to work in Washington, D.C. I worked for a security firm. I did guard work, loss prevention, undercover investigations, retail, mostly in preparation as I was training to become a PI. But anyway, I spent a lot of time outdoors, lunch outside the Capitol building, walks along the mall, past the monuments. I've spent quite some time looking at and through the monuments and museums they have there. And I have to say, it speaks ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. Now, I don't have a problem with them mimicking the architecture. It is quite nice. But it seems that not only did they take the ancient Egyptians and Greeks' architecture, but they also took their deity worship as well. And I know you're probably thinking, what you talking about, Willis? Oh, I'm gonna tell you, and you'll never be the same. Because sometimes things aren't always what they seem. So I think probably an easy way of doing this is to line up the deities of ancient Greece with the deities of ancient Egypt, just to see if we can find any relation. By the way, keep in mind that the Bible was written primarily in Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. Ancient Greece and Egypt, they are reflections of each other, extensions of the same kingdom in a manner of speaking. Same ideologies, values, polytheistic worship, and you can definitely see the influence in their architecture and art. Now, if I try to take you down the hierarchy of the deities from each civilization, it will be confusing, so let me get to the point. Which Egyptian deity do you think is the parallel of Apollo? Well, Zeus and Leto would be the same deities as Osiris and Isis. That would make Apollo the same as Horus. Some believe Osiris and Isis are the Greek deities Dionysus and Demeter. By the way, I want to point out that the Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus are two separate eyes that look very similar. So, Horus actually has an evolving history. You may have heard of Horus the Elder and Horus the Younger. Horus the Elder is one of the original sky gods, born of Geb and Nut. Then you have Horus the Younger, born of Osiris and Isis. Then there is Horus the Child, who became Harpocrates after Alexander the Great conquered Egypt. In the Roman world, he would be known as the second son of Isis, which influenced the cult of Isis and Christianity. Apollo, he was the god of light, music, medicine, and poetry, prophecy, dance, manly beauty, and more. The Greek variants are Apollon, Apollo, Apollos. Now, Abaddon is Hebrew and Apollyon is also Greek, but it is used to name the destroyer or the undoer of the underworld, the abyss gatekeeper. The history of these deities is very extensive, except for Apollyon, which is a biblical reference, although there are other deities and other cultures that could represent this god, that I encourage you to look deeper into if you're interested. So here's the deal. We have in the US this statue that we all know is the Statue of Liberty. Its original name is Liberty Enlightening the World. Now I know that we have all been told that this statue is of a woman, but no, that's a man, baby, yeah. More specifically, it's the god Apollo. Now, I can always claim that I'm just speculating, but as I am speculating, I want to give you a brief history of this monument. We've all heard that this was a gift from France, correct? It was designed by sculptor Frederick August Bartholdi. The inauguration of the statue was to take place in October 1886. The man who was in charge of the event was General Charles Pomeroy Stone. He was in charge of the 6-year construction, including the pedestal on Bedloe's Island. He was a graduate at West Point. He served in the Mexican War. He was a banker in San Francisco. He was the Inspector General of the Washington Militia and in charge of security for the inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. Now, after he was decommissioned, he traveled to Africa and became chief of staff to the Khedive of Egypt and Sudan. Now, isn't that interesting? Now, when he came back to the States, people were suspicious of him, right? Up until the inauguration of the statue. And on that day, he would lead a march down Fifth Avenue. I have text from an article describing the event. Moving down Fifth Avenue, the parade grew into a long column with more than 2 miles of regular troops, resplendent with swords and medals. The troops were followed by military bands. The New York Times noted, somber and sad and thin, looking as though they had been packed away in a damp trunk sometime about the centennial, with no camphor, and had just emerged somewhat motley and careworn as a little moth-eaten, but amazingly enthusiastic and discordant. Following the military marchers were the Sons of France, French societies and their Franco-American counterparts, and the judges and governors, the mayors, the veterans of wars, as well as the famous police forces of Philadelphia and Brooklyn. Next in line were the higher ranks of the Masonic orders of the Knights of Pythias and the Knights of Templar, whose march was so swift that it looked like a passing of a comet that burned its way past and swept seaward, dissolving like a dream. You know what's also interesting about that time is that Grover Cleveland, the governor of New York, had described the statue as a deity, a sentinel goddess. Keep in mind, folks, women back then, they were in no way considered equals with very few liberties. So why they would have a female Statue of Liberty is beyond me. with segregation and everything still going on, that is why some people regarded the Statue of Liberty as being hypocrisy. Well, it is in one form the god Harpocrates. Do you get it? Anyway, the connections to this, folks, are profound. And if you noted, it is something secret societies were involved with. You know what's also interesting about the day of the inauguration? It was all mostly ruined by bad weather, and for good reason. They were trying to raise a statue and ritual worship of this god, just like the golden calf. God wasn't having it. It rained, everything got soaked, the boats were all lined up on the harbor for the celebration, and then a thick fog came over them. They could barely see the statue or any fireworks. Go look into it, folks. You can't make this stuff up. You can't. And you know, this is not the first time this was done. Back in 1840, a sculpture was made of George Washington for Washington, D.C., the Horatio Greenough sculpture. Now, who is that supposed to be? Is that really Georgie boy? Nah, come on. In Greek apparel? Really? In the same pose as the Statue of Liberty, except he's sitting down? Folks, do you see how insane this is? Maybe I'm out of my mind, right? This is another statue also symbolizing freedom. Did you know that? Why is George Washington depicted as a seated Roman general back then as well? The Colossus of Rhodes is another early rendering, another very similar rendering to the Statue of Liberty, the Roman goddess of freedom. Actually, go look into Charles of Lindos. He constructed a 110-foot statue on a 50-foot pedestal. The statue was believed to be dedicated to the Greek god of the sun, Helios, or Apollo. This was back around 300 BC. It is almost an exact copy of the Statue of Liberty, without clothing. Or should I say the Statue of Liberty is a copy of it. I don't know, folks. Whatever you think the government is or what it's doing, just take a look at what it's done. I have a lot more for you guys coming up, so stay tuned. Until then, of course, stay awake, stay aware, stay safe, and I'll talk to you all soon.